Hello, I'm Jeremy Fernandez. Tonight on The Virus, Australia opens up, but there are still concerns about mass protests. Plus, strategies for a potential second wave. How can we protect the gains that have already been made? But first, the Prime Minister says the country is well on track to bringing in stage 3 of eased restrictions next month. National Affairs correspondent Greg Jennett has the details.
Sanitised and synthesised, the footy stadium experience is almost the real deal again.
People will be able to watch the games not as cardboard cutouts, but in person.
As long as a venue has no more than 40,000 seats, and as long as no more than 10,000 people are in them in allocated places, they could reopen next month. Part of a general relaxation. In indoor spaces, numbers won't be hard limited to 100 people. The new rule? Each needs 4 square metres around them. If all stays on track,
we are in a good place.
The end of July would bring the nation close to completion of the 3-step recovery.
I'm not interested in the debate about what people want to tear down.
What interests the Prime Minister most is economic reconstruction ahead.
Honestly, people, let's focus on what's really happening.
And evidently not the removal of videos, films and statues deemed to aggravate racial tensions.
What you're watching on television is your business. It's not going to create one job. Let's focus on where Australians are hurting today.
Even though its members are moving at different speeds, National Cabinet's confirmed that health has largely given way to economic reopening as its main game now. And in around 6 weeks, most onerous social restrictions will be gone. Special flights to return foreign students to universities here could also begin on the long haul back to international reconnection.
This week, the number of confirmed cases nationally has stayed at or below 10 each day. 102 people have died, but it's been more than 2 weeks since the last confirmed death. And here's why authorities are confident most restrictions will be lifted by late July. There are now fewer than 150 active cases nationwide, and that number is falling every day. Of the 7,200 cases diagnosed, more than 6,780 people, or 94%, have fully recovered. One of those active cases is in Queensland, in that of a 2-year-old boy. However, health officials say the toddler is not seriously unwell. The child's family has recently been overseas and was quarantined in Victoria before returning to Brisbane. The Queensland government now says it'll open its borders to interstate travellers on the 10th of July. Tasmania now has no active cases and will lift more restrictions next week. The Premier Peter Gutwein described the breakthrough as a milestone moment. From midday on Wednesday, 80 people will be allowed at indoor and outdoor gatherings. The rule applies to gyms, pubs, restaurants, weddings and funerals. Meanwhile, Victorian authorities are waiting on more results from protesters who gathered in the city centre to voice their concerns about Aboriginal deaths in custody. More than 10,000 people defied the wishes of authorities by going to the event. One man in his 30s has since tested positive. He's in isolation, but so far no one else is known to have contracted the virus.
There was lots of wearing of masks, but again, masks are not 100% either protection from you if somebody else is infectious, or indeed if you're infectious. It's a real mitigation, but it doesn't completely protect those around you.
Protesters have again defied health directives and gathered in Sydney for a mass protest over Indigenous deaths in custody. Our reporter Josh Bavis joins us. Josh, what happened?
Well, Jeremy, tonight a large group of protesters were followed through Hyde Park by police. In fact, they were zigzagging through the park for about half an hour. The protest sprung up there. It was originally planned online to be held here at Town Hall, but organisers shifted the location and posted online that it would now be moved to the park. Now, despite the warnings, despite the wet weather, the protesters still came out in large numbers, although at this stage it appears that there have been no arrests. Police warned the crowd several times to disperse. Here at Town Hall, police resources were brought out in their hundreds. There were paramedics on standby, and even parts of the CBD were shut down to traffic late this afternoon.
And is the protest over, Josh? Are the crowds going home?
Well, a smaller group returned here to Town Hall and were again told to disperse. It looks like they have moved on. So a short time ago, police began reopening parts of George and Bathurst streets, and also the light rail and the train network, which was suspended, has now resumed.
Josh Bavis reporting from Sydney. The New South Wales Education Department says school camps and most excursions will be off limits until at least term 3. Some restrictions will be eased from Monday, when assemblies no longer than 15 minutes will be permitted, along with choir classes and student photos. Rose Bay Public School in Sydney's east is the latest school to have been shut down because of a coronavirus case. Across the state, the number of people allowed to gather in groups inside and outside has been increased to 20.
First a city, then a country, then the world. With reports of deaths on most continents and no vaccine in sight, the questions remain. How far will the virus spread? How many lives will it take?
So while Australians are now enjoying relaxed restrictions, New Zealanders are relishing their freedom. After more than 2 weeks of no new cases, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the virus has been eliminated. New Zealanders are back at work, all public transport has resumed, public events are on, and retail and hospitality businesses are operating as normal. International borders are still closed, but even that is in the government's sights, with the so-called Trans-Tasman travel bubble high on the agenda.
It's very clear that Tasmania is set to go, and we should start. Frankly, we should not have states being held back by the slowest mover, so to speak. So let's get going, and let's have a precedent here. And I'm certain that when we've got all the protocols sorted out, which can be done very, very quickly, because so much work has been done, we could be off.
One of the architects of New Zealand's success, the epidemiologist Professor Michael Baker, says the country's harsh lockdown was a hard sell. I spoke to him and Professor Alan Cheng from Monash University earlier.
I know when I was looking at the experience of countries in Asia, it was clear that this was more like a SARS virus. And so we had a good plan, but the wrong virus. So I was one of the people who really led the advocacy to the government to change direction and adopt an elimination approach.
Elimination in the context of a virus that at that stage was spreading through Wuhan very vigorously just seems like almost an impossible idea, really.
Yeah, it did look challenging, but again, looking to the experience of Asia and countries like Taiwan, who acted very quickly, it looked like a reasonable goal. And remember, one part of this can be, at the extreme end, is exclusion. And already some Pacific islands, and I think islands in other parts of the world, where, if you like, lifting the drawbridge and basically stopping the virus entirely. And that approach actually has quite a good history with influenza pandemics, for example.
All right, we're getting a lot of questions about the Black Lives Matter protests and various protests that have been taking place around the world over the past couple of weeks, including coming up this weekend. And a lot of people are wanting to know whether that is going to lead to a second wave. Professor Cheng, can you say with any certainty whether that will precipitate a second wave and how severe that might be?
It's difficult to know. We're at a really delicate point at the moment, and particularly in Victoria, probably more than other jurisdictions. But we can't say that there's no transmission in other places. What we have is a very low number of cases in Australia, and when you get to these sorts of numbers, random chance is a really important determinant. These very last cases, do they transmit on or not, is a really important question. If someone that happens to have infection goes to a public place and infects other people, then there is a very real chance that it will take off.
Professor Baker, I know you've done some work to contribute to the WHO's work around the world, but I'm interested in your objective view of how they've performed during this pandemic.
But the two areas of advice that I think were really problematic. Firstly, they said, do not shut your borders. That was an overreaction to this pandemic. And I don't know if that's still their advice, but certainly right through February. And many countries around the world ignored that advice. And I think it would have saved lives, and it would have prevented the pandemic entering some island states, for example. And certainly Australia and New Zealand ignored the advice. And there is a mechanism where you can lodge your objection to that and go against the WHO recommendations, and you provide a justification, and Australia and New Zealand both did that. But that was very unhelpful. The second area, I think, was their policy on this area of fabric masks for the public. And I think the evidence has mounted steadily during the pandemic that that was a very effective intervention. And it was widely adopted in Asia and Asian countries. And whereas the advice for WHO changed a week ago to say, yes, actually, we do now recommend the use of fabric masks as a public health measure to control, as source control from the public, and also to protect the public.
What will be involved in maintaining elimination for countries such as New Zealand and even Australia, where we're headed in that direction?
I think a number of jurisdictions are probably pretty close to elimination, if not already there. But we do worry that it is a temporary state. It just takes one, a traveller that isn't, where the quarantine hasn't completely stopped transmission, or one cruise, the Q80 transport vessel came in with a number of cases. It doesn't take much to set things off again. And I think even if we get to elimination, it may be a temporary state, and we may need to, to fight small spot fires, as it were. So having a good tracking and tracing mechanism to stamp out any transmission chains that might start up again, is going to be really important.
Professor Baker, what do you make of elimination being a tenuous and fleeting moment, possibly, particularly if New Zealand considers opening up its borders with other countries, including Australia?
Yes, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, there is a definition of elimination which is a high level of certainty there's no remaining virus, and it's got these three elements in New Zealand. One is an interval from the last case without any new cases, and basically 28 days or so is you've got around 95% chance that there's no virus left in the country, in the context of a lot of targeted testing. And also you have to exclude, of course, cases that are in people who are sitting in quarantine facilities after arrival in the country. So they're safely managed, so they're not part of the definition. But yeah, it can change. You can move in and out of elimination if we have a failure at the border. And of course, there is increasing pressure for humanitarian and economic reasons to increase the number of people coming through quarantine into the country. And we do know, we do hear stories of, poor management at some of these facilities. I mean, there's 3,000 people sitting in hotels and other facilities in Auckland now, and occasionally there's a bit of excess mixing and various things will go wrong. So that's the nature of health protection. You need additional barriers, and so we have to plan for failure at some point.
Now, globally, the number of known infections is approaching 7.5 million. More than 2 million of those are in the US, where health authorities are facing a surge of community transmissions because of mass protests and social unrest. More than 420,000 people have died worldwide. The UK has the second highest death toll, with more than 41,000 lives lost. The financial cost to the UK is also becoming clearer. The economy there shrank by 20.4% in April alone. That's the largest monthly contraction on record. The contraction is 3 times greater than what happened during the 2008 global financial crisis. Another worrying statistic for the United States is approaching. The US will soon have lost more people to COVID-19 than it did in World War I. These figures are just from the 10th of June, and on current rates, that milestone will be passed within days. And if you want to see more of that conversation with Professors Michael Baker and Alan Cheng, just check out the ABC News YouTube and Facebook channels. That's the latest from us. Stay safe. Goodbye.